This is not a show and might not even be a connection. Here's Judah and Guest.
And this is Judah and Guest, and my guest today is Michael Katuzis, as you see down below. And
technically to your left, right? I don't know. Anyway, go ahead. Depending on how you're oriented.
Yeah, and it's mirrored too, so I'm pointing left right now, and it's okay. So
Yeah.
the thing we were talking about tonight is we're coming back to. It felt like we didn't really. We got too much into opinion last week, and so this week we're going to talk a little bit. I think Michael's going to talk a little bit more about scripture. I haven't really looked into the scripture much. I had something to say about storytelling and the like, and but for the most part, we're going to try to come at it from a more less of our own opinion and more from a philosophical or scriptural or theological standpoint. So, and maybe if we have time, we can talk a little bit about, kind of segue into, or what do you call it? Transverse law. Use the transverse law to talk about other shows like Marvel and what have you. But we'll see. We'll see if we have time for that tonight.
Yeah.
We're just going to kind of continue the conversation. So, Mike, we left off sort of disagreeing. I believed I was more of on the thought that horror can be used for storytelling, and kind of give me. I don't want to put words in your mouth. What was sort of your general thought last time?
Okay. I'm of the ilk. Basically, as I've looked at it, I don't think you can be Christian. Not can be Christian. That's foolishness. All right. Let me clarify. All right. Okay. I don't think it is okay, I guess, for Christians to view horror films as a genre because of what they are. That's not to say that. I want to clarify. I don't want to make it sound like you can't have a movie that has evil in it or something that can scare in it. But I do take issue, I think, with the genre, because it seems the point of it is just to be scared. And so the point is to just delve into scary things, traumatic things, horrific things, subjecting oneself to it for entertainment, for to get a feeling of fear or adrenaline pumping and all that, and just doesn't seem like the right way to go about it, or right way, if that makes any sense. Anyway, I'll just say this. I was thinking about what you had said last time we talked. And I was actually in the scriptures the next morning. I was in James, and I started thinking about, most of what we were going over was just kind of like our opinions on things. But I don't think scripture is silent. I mean, I know we brought one or two into scriptures, but I don't think it is silent on the issue. I do think we have to establish what we do believe horror to be. I read a definition. I'm just curious. We'll start there. You tell me if you agree with this. It says horror is a film that seeks to elicit fear for entertainment purposes. That's a Wikipedia one. You've got horror films are motion pictures calculated to cause intense repugnance, fear, or dread. Would you agree that that's the gist of it?
I'd go with the second one. Yeah. I would add. I think that's fine. Okay.
So based on, we're in agreement. I agree with either definition. I think they're fine. And I guess my problem that I have, and what stands out to me as problematic, is that fear, repugnance, dread, terror. This is the point. This is the point of of watching it. It's to scare, to jar. I don't think it takes. If you think about when we've watched horror movies growing up, I mean, you probably laugh at some of the ones you saw when you were a kid now, but I'm sure when you saw them, they're probably fairly scary for the most part, I would think.
I didn't watch horror movies as a kid, but
I didn't either. I watched a few here and there. Teenagers, when I started really watching these things, I saw a few maybe here and there. But I do remember certain things that I saw were scary. And as I talked with friends about movies, hey, have you seen that? Oh yeah, that was so scary. Children of the Corn, blah blah blah. They'd get into all these things and about it scared them. Now people kind of laugh at them. They kind of those '80s ones. They're just kind of it's kind of like what's the word?
Satire?
Yeah, they kind of satire. I mean, you even got movies like the Scream movies that just kind of joke on it a little bit.
Yeah.
But the reality is, they were scary for their time, and I think that as there's like a moth flying right here. Anyway,
Mothman?
Mothman. Oh no, yeah, saw that movie actually. I don't know if we classify that as horror.
Yeah, I was gonna say, would you consider that okay?
I saw it back in college. I don't remember. I vaguely remember. It's more like trauma. I don't know what it was. What you call it? Anyway, I don't want to take over the conversation, but there were some things that originally we had talked. There was a scripture that I had mentioned that said, "I will set no worthless things before my eyes." It says, "I hate the work of those who fall away. It shall not fasten its grip on me." I think when we watch movies and entertainment, we are interacting with ideas, stories, truth claims, experiences that do affect us, whether we think that it does or it doesn't. I'll tell you, when I went to college, they told us media is very influential. I don't know if anyone would disagree. I mean, a lot of people individually go, media doesn't affect me. I'm like, yeah, okay. They got studies that show how you can direct people's affections, entertainment, all sorts of things that they love, things that they hate. Your media, getting them to laugh at something, getting them to be repulsed at something. Media is very influential. Music's very influential. Images, a picture's worth 1,000 words. You got motion picture. And so when you're depicting certain events like horror, if the point is to scare, then what they're going to do is come up with frightening things. You've got you talked about The Conjuring last week. There was this one scene that I read about the evil witch lady who was killed, and her demonic spirit is affecting the house. They're tormenting these kids. The girl wakes up and she's hovering over top and spits up some gunk into the girl's mouth, and the girl becomes possessed. Correct? Do you remember that scene? Okay.
No, a girl, but the mom, yeah.
The mom, okay.
Spoiler alert.
Sorry, spoiler alert. Yeah, if you're going to watch Conjuring, sorry. Put your earmuffs on, I guess. I don't know. But I feel like you can't engage the topic without actually looking at some of what's going on. But as I was reading reviews, a lot of people said it was a fairly scary movie. Like, it gave you the heebie-jeebies because of a lot of things that went on. It approached demonic possession and, how it controlled people, and people were trying to kill each other as the spirit would enter them. And that's the point of the horror. It's to scare you. And so they're introducing you to occultic things, demonic things. And I think the ending, spoiler alert, just cut it off. I think they eventually do an exorcism. The family itself just does a random exorcism, and the spirit leaves. And
I don't think the family does.
Was it the family or is the investigators? I'm sorry, the investigators? Yeah. Yes.
They're aided. I think the family is part of it, but they're aided by the investigators. They lead the They're not just investigators. It's based on a true story. It's a pastor and his wife.
Oh, is it a pastor and his wife?
Yeah, he saw it's his ministry to go and help people with that were afflicted by demons.
Oh, okay. Well, the Wikipedia didn't mention that. They made it sound like they were paranormal investigators, and then
that was kind of. That's what he saw as his ministry to find these things and help with them.
But in the end, after they do this exorcism thing, if I'm correct, it focuses on this little toy box or something like that, and then it starts playing or moving on its own at the very end. So then it seems that the spirit, that whatever they did not work. It's still hanging around doing its thing.
Well, I mean, even when Jesus exorcised demons, they went into other things.
No, I hear you, but this is what I want to get to. First of all, the whole experience, I don't think sets things up as the whole experience that we see. It doesn't set things up according to reality as how we know Scripture is. It ascribes to the demonic more power than it actually has, if that makes sense. And since we know that stuff like this influences us, you see stuff like this often enough, it will start to shape your reality. I'll give an example. About 15 years ago, I guess you'd say, there was a kid that I was actually trying to help. Okay. And he actually had no help. This guy, it turns out, actually had some. I'm not joking with you. This guy got heavy into New Age mysticism and had demonic issues. Is the best way I can put it. All right. New experience for me. Never encountered anything like that. Had some very, very crazy events happen as I'm talking to this kid and trying to help him. And I'll be honest with you. I mean, it's not every day you encounter the demonic. It's not every day you encounter that side of things. But when you do, your point of reference is what you've seen.
Right.
And I'll tell you what, from the movies that I'd seen in the past, I was expecting all sorts of horrible, terrible, creepy things to take place. I remember it was around that time, it was actually a church group that went out to go see The Grudge. And so I'm seeing all this, and I'm like, oh, yeah, I remember thinking, actually, and I'm talking to you as one who doesn't like to think that media influences me, but I'm going to be honest with you. I remember thinking some of the scary imagery and the things that I'd see might be something that might happen as I attempt to talk to this kid, And if you remember, like The Grudge, it was pretty hopeless. I mean, this thing just.
I didn't see The Grudge.
Never saw it? All right. But anyway, so you've got horror movies, and since the point is to scare, the point is to terrify, you kind of have to remove hope. You kind of have to remove the things of light. You got to make the dark, and kind of make it seem hopeless and bad, because that's what kind of gives you the sense of fear. And if we take our cues from that type of stuff, it can actually even affect how we approach things in reality. And I'll be honest with you, there was a lot more of anxiety in talking and dealing with this kid that needed to be there, because I assumed Satan was a heck of a lot more powerful than he was. Not to say he's not powerful, he is. Scripture is very clear in that. But I'm not joking with you. All those little images and things that I've seen in the past are floating around. Now, I know not all horror movies, demonic stuff like that. But I'm using The Conjuring as an example of how it can influence things. And honestly, after I watch any horror movie I've ever seen, it's not like I've walked away with a good feeling. It's usually kind of this blech, this unclean thing. And in line with that scripture that we had originally said when we were first talking in Sal, where it said, I will set no worthless thing before my eyes, I'm hard-pressed to find the redeeming in it. I'm sure people can try to find redeeming in it, but if you think about what the point is, it's to elicit fear, shock, exposed to graphic stuff, slasher. I know you didn't think that all horror was good. Like, you didn't particularly like the slasher stuff where it's just like the whole point is to watch people get torn apart. But whether it's people being torn apart, which I think can actually cause people to get fearful of situations, people can get, it can jolt them. I think whether it's demonic, slasher, all of it sets people up. It first gets them focusing on things that aren't of God, exposes you to them in horrid brutality and in horrid ways, because the point is to shock the person. And it's done as a form of entertainment. And when we're to do all things unto the Lord, I can't see how this meets that criteria. That makes sense. I can't how we can say, hey, Jesus walks in, hey, what you doing? Watching this terrible, this horror film about, this demonic lady that's vomiting in people's mouths. And, it doesn't. And, you're exposing yourself to things of the enemy, getting actually false ideas of how the enemy moves, how life is, how we should respond to these things. It just, yeah.
Well, I don't know for sure that it's like what makes you say that it's particularly false? The way, because of your experience, or because do we know exactly how demons work and move in our reality?
I mean, I think that we do on some levels. I mean, there's been books and stuff like this written. There's people. There was actually a counselor here who was a Christian counselor, and he's like, man, he's like, I do believe some people are mentally ill, but I've seen some stuff where it's like there was no other explanation than the demonic. And he'd seen weird things like, them speaking in different languages and voices going all over the place and craziness like that. And there's a spirit that he said you could actually feel kind of like come up in this person. So he's like, it's almost like this person stepped out and something stepped in. And I know secular psychology talks about, oh, that's just multiple personalities, yada, yada, yada. But,
well, and see, don't you think there could be some, I mean, I agree with you. I hear what you're saying, and for the most part, I agree with you. But don't you think there is a place to explore the supernatural and the horrific supernatural? So the scary supernatural, through narrative, through story.
Well, I don't think that you can't have in storytelling the supernatural or the scary, because it's a part of our world. But my view. The way I think it should be done is it's like it should reflect kind of how it is, like the realities of things, as opposed to just made up. Because of the nature of it, it's going to jar people. It's going to make people. It'll give them false ideas of what it is. Horror as a genre, I guess I have a problem with its point, its purpose. Its purpose is to just shock and scare. And yeah, they'll weave like kind of a not morality tale, but like some story, and where the good guys win in the end, which not always, but some aspect where someone can argue, well, that's a redeemable quality of it. But to get through all the tripe and the shock and being exposed to all these evil things, to get to that, it seems like you're mixing. And actually, it's funny. I mean, from the horror movies I saw when they tried to do that, it wasn't like those things were even redeemable. It wasn't like it's the wisdom of God or anything like that, or that it affirms the truths of God. In fact, it affirmed a very worldly view, a very satanic view. If you believe that Satan, which I do, is behind the world system. So,
do you think? But I'm really not concerned whether or not horror movies are redeemable. My real question is, do you believe that, as storytellers, you and I, where is the place for? Is there a place for horror in storytelling for Christians?
So you're saying not as a genre, like you don't like explain. I guess you need. Let me ask you that. What do you mean by horror as a place? And give me an example.
Do you believe that eliciting fear in people is through horrific things, through seeing things that what was the definition? Repulse, repugnant?
Yeah.
Scary. Do you believe that has a place? And where do you draw the line? Because I mean, you believe in, Lord of the Rings. You think that's okay, right? Not.
For the most part, I mean, I remember you had mentioned
acceptable.
For the most part, I remember there was a few scenes where it seemed like they started to get a little more over the top with it. Like you had mentioned, the faces were like, the kings when they were on the weather top it could be creepy. I remember the guys in the dead marshes got a lot more creepy, when they're when he was in the water.
I thought I remembered like. Maggots or something, and when they were in the water they were rotting, and I remember
that part they were rotting and stuff like that.
No.
This is where I think the line, it's funny, if you're looking for a hard fast line, I don't think you can, but I don't think we should be looking necessarily for how close to the line can we get. I think because evil exists, and I'm totally not in alignment. I don't think scripturally you can make a case for a movie where the end all is to be just to subject yourself to horror and terrible things as the end of itself. But I think if it's part of a bigger story, because evil exists, and like I said, I'll go back to that one Christian movie that I saw. It's on the tip of my
Faust.
tongue.
Yeah.
No, not Faust.
Oh.
What was it called? I forget. It's actually after they named. It's got the same title as this one Christian song. I'll find out and I'll post it.
Okay.
But it was a true story about three families connected via the Rwandan genocide. An American family here in Tennessee, and two families in Rwanda. And it got into the darker things. You can't get into Rwandan genocide without getting into dark things.
Right. Right. Yeah.
But the point wasn't to let people.
Would it be?
But it wasn't to glorify it. Or go ahead and bring.
Was it called Beautiful Broken?
Beautifully Broken. Yes.
Beautifully Broken.
That's it. Yes. So the point wasn't to actually engage just to let's watch people get chopped up like a horror film. It showed it, but there was a point, and actually it didn't show it like you're saying, or like people might think. It showed it in a muted, not toned down, but a lot of things were implied. You might not, in a horror movie, machete comes, split guy's head goes in two, and they show you and it's all its brutality and stuff like that happens. But when you come to art and when you come to film and entertainment, I don't think that that's the way to do things. I think if we're to honor God with our entertainment as writers, as cinematographers, as people who film things, I wouldn't shy away from scary things like this film did, but you would show enough to understand its place in the story, but not just for its shock value, not for its gratuitousness. Like if I've seen 300. 300 would be an example of where they gloried in just macabre death. Like they almost turned it into almost like an art form in the movie where people are dying and the blood's just slow motion glistening and the earth tone palette in the background.
Oh yeah. I mean,
it's just like, come on, man. The whole point was to watch people die under a thin veiled. Oh yeah, we're gonna retell the Greek stand at Thermopylae. It's like, okay, yeah, right. It was not very well acted, just terribly, But and you get my point. But they reveled in, this is what I'm saying. They reveled in the graphic and the evil and the dark, and the story took precedence behind it. Like the point was to show bodies and meat walls and all that other stuff like that.
I guess my point is those are the extremes. Those are the outliers. Most
modern horror is kind of this way.
Right.
I mean,
well, I don't know if it is or not. I think most horror porn, like I said, slasher porn, yes. Like that's a genre into itself. That's just, to me, is worthless.
Okay.
300 isn't even a horror movie. But
it's not. But the connection is that it's taking graphic and macabre things.
Gratuitous.
Yeah, gratuitous.
Violence and such. So I'm more curious with the middle. Like I don't believe there's a line. But I do think there is a middle ground where I think it's important to access. There are certain feelings and experiences that I think we would be remiss as Christians if we didn't access those things in people.
It's part of the human experience. You're right. Yeah. We shouldn't shy away. But I mean, honestly, since the horror genre is set up to scare, a lot of these things aren't even realistic. I mean, it's just let me think of the creepiest, wackest situation I can think of that will just terrify people. And let me find the most visually, visceral way I can show it to just jar people. And you'll see people coming out. Like I listen to horror people talk sometimes, and they'll be talking about how, oh, man, did you see that movie? Man, I was just crazy. I just, the way it affected me, man, I can't look at dolls the same way anymore. I can't, it actually affects them,
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
When you traumatize someone, I'm kind of like, this is not good.
But I guess for me, the way in which we engage those things as Christian storytellers isn't to put the kibosh on them, isn't to just say we're not going to engage with that at all. I think the way I've always approached these sort of things is to reframe them and recycle them in a way. Not that we recycle slasher porn or what have you, but it's always been my thought, my philosophy, and correct me if I'm wrong, or if you disagree, but it's always been my philosophy that we look at something like that and we say, okay, I understand that you something about this you like. There's something that draws you to this, and we don't just say you're an idiot for liking that, but instead my approach has always been to say, okay, what is it about that draws you to it, and where's the truth? Where can we find common ground in order to really find truth? And by truth I mean to really start to experience reality.
Do you think we can find common ground in like horror genre as it's defined? I don't think we can.
Not as you defined it, but
well, no, as we defined it, as we agreed the definition was in the beginning.
Oh, in that definition, yes, absolutely, I think we can.
Okay, explain how. And what I want you to do is explain in light of as Christians. I mean, you've got a scripture in Matthew 6. It talks about that the eyes are the gateway to the soul, and that the body is basically filled with, whatever we allow to pass through. If it's light that fills the eyes, then the body's going to be full of it. If it's darkness, it's full of the eyes. That if our eyes are like the gateway to the darkness, and it brings in our body, and talks about how great that darkness is.
Well, I mean, but if we never engage with things that we, if we have a very black and white view of what darkness is, black and white view of darkness, but if we have a very dogmatic, if I have a very dogmatic view, and I don't engage with anything that even resembles anything, then it closes off conversation.
Well, I don't think we're doing that. I don't think I'm in agreement or you're in agreement that you can't have evil portrayed. But the issue that we're discussing is horror by its nature. The point of the movie is to subject people to all these emotions and fear and all that. Like, that's what people go to see. Is that conducive to our faith?
Is there overlap? Is there yeah, I absolutely think there's an area of discussion and an area because and this is the overlap for me, is that I believe that people have and need to express very deep and hidden traumatic experiences of fear and of in a certain kind of fear, supernatural fear, fear of the unknown, fear of the supernatural. And I believe, as you were saying, there is a huge push in modern day science, modern day politics to exclude the supernatural and to say that, and to explain it through physical means, through biological means, and I feel like I have an answer that is different than that in my experience and what I know from Scripture and from my experience with Christ, is that there is a supernatural. It can be very scary. In fact, on the good side and the bad side, can be horrific, and yet we still have a place in that realm to deal with these things. And I'm not afraid of going into that. And that's what I enjoy about, that's what I do connect with and like about a lot of these horror movies, is courage. There's often somebody who has courage to face something that is just absolutely uncontrollable. And it's something that I've really learned lately to appreciate, is to be able to step into uncontrollable situations, something you know nothing about, and just believe in goodness and believe in righteousness. Now, from a humanistic, secular perspective, that's a different answer. But I feel like My answer is different, but the playground is the same. In other words, there are now somebody vomiting into somebody else's mouth. The image itself is you might it's you might say it's not realistic. It's not, but
Yeah, I'd say it's horrifying first, and
It's
I think it will
horrifying.
jar the soul if you wake up one night and there's a demon floating over you who vomits in your mouth and then possesses you. I
Well, but
mean,
the thing is that it's
you know,
symbolic. It's symbolic and raises feelings that people have had, through abuse, sexual abuse, through To me, it's very symbolic of the kind of control that some other people can have over words, can have over somebody else's, and just really control them, not necessarily through real possession, maybe through real possession as well, but it's real symbolic of like very abusive and jarring and horrific ways that people that they do interact with other people and people experience. And not to say that we need to glorify that. And I don't necessarily, I don't know if it's glorifying it or not. I don't think it is. You could probably make the case that it is. But I do think that these things could be shown in a way that more clearly brings out the way that we deal, the better way to deal with these things. If you're saying that scripture doesn't say that we do it this way or that way, the way the movie says, okay, that's but I think it's still like I said, I think it's still the same playground. It's still the same context, but I think we just have a better answer.
I guess my problem I've got, what stands out to me is the picture that's painted, just like say from The Conjuring that you've seen, is that it doesn't do what you're saying. It just exposes
it
people.
did for me.
Well, then explain, because I think most people, like what you're saying is I don't normally hear that. I usually hear people being scared, terrified. I remember when I used to teach Bible and we get into all sorts of things that go on. A lot of times I'd see how entertainment has affected a lot of the way that they saw the world, whether they saw the demonic, how they saw, violence. I've seen how media in general has affected, and there was a lot of having to sift through all that stuff. So
because
I've never heard an answer like yours. I've always heard like, oh my gosh, Satan's scary and terrible. And all these,
they don't have a master's in counseling, and they also it's something that I've thought a lot about, and I do believe that they have come to the same place that I have, without now, I don't think I've ever experienced that sort of relationship with somebody else, but I think I've seen it in a counseling. I've seen it, not vicariously, but in a counseling setting where I've seen it third person,
manifest or something.
Yeah, or explained, and I think there's I guess what I'm saying is that I think it's our job to take those people whenever you hear something like this, to not just say, to hell with, horror, but to say, hey, in this situation, I think you're not going deep enough. I don't think I don't think you are. I think these things can be symbolic, and bring up real feelings that the conclusion we have better answers for.
Well, let's see what the scriptures actually say. So we've got where we're talking about movies, and you got Psalm 101:3 that says, "I will set no worthless thing before my eyes. It shall not fasten scrip on me. I hate the works of those who fall away." I feel like, we know Hollywood's making these things, and we know they ain't trying to honor God with them. And I feel like that spirit is reflected in the movies themselves. Secondly, you've got, it says I'm going to read from Matthew 6:22. It says, "The eye is the lamp of the body. So then if your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Now, interestingly, right after that, it says in Matthew, no one can serve two masters, for either he will hate one and love the other, or he'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. But you've got this idea.
Talking about wealth, mammon.
Wait. But the idea is not just talking about wealth. I mean, would you disagree if someone tried to serve, make a spouse a god or a master and serve them as well as God, and try to do both?
I just think that we have to talk though. Then where is the line? Because I mean that's why I brought up before, like stuff like Harry Potter, Marvel movies. I mean, pretty much any movie brings in front of your eyes something that is worthless and can be detrimental to your soul.
Can be. I think motive plays a part in it, and like I said, if your point's to shock, then they're going to do things to make it visceral, and that will succeed in shocking you. I think if you're actually doing it as part of a story, and you're not showing it's not going to be horror in the sense of horror movies are defined now. It'll be in the sense of where it'll show the darkness, so you get a sense of what the darkness is, but it will still be veiled. It will still be. There's a word that's escaping me right now, where it's like it's not toned down, muted.
Muted.
Because for the sake of exposing you to something dark, you don't want to show it in all its glory. Like when you saw Saving Private Ryan, was one of the first movies that really showed the visceralness of war. Mm-hmm. And he got Spielberg got all sorts of awards for it. And when veterans saw this, it put them into shock. There were people who were going to PTSD, immediately like, oh my gosh, I'm on Normandy again, I don't think we need to go that far for entertainment. And I remember the first time I saw that, I had never seen anything that visceral. And like he succeeded in bringing in the fear that you would probably feel if you were running down the ramp on Normandy. But I don't know if that's healthy, if that's a good thing to do, if the effect it has is to jar people. And then after they're jarred and you've seen it a few times, then you become desensitized to it.
Yeah, you're jaded. Yeah.
Yes. To where what should horrify doesn't anymore. And so here's another scripture. Again, it's in Luke. It's the same thing where it talks about the eye is the lamp of your body. If it's clear, your whole body will be full of light. And when it's bad, your body is full of darkness. But it also says this. It adds a little bit to it, which I think is interesting here. It says, then watch out that the light in you is not darkness. If, therefore, your whole body is full of light, with no dark part in it, it will be wholly illumined, as when the lamp illuminates you with its rays. So it's saying, with no dark part in it. So there's this idea of pulling away from what is dark. There's this idea of walking in light and putting out the dark, not letting the dark enter through the eye and into the body and filling the body.
But how does Scripture define darkness?
I mean, I think that the darkness that they're talking about, I mean, when you think about it in terms of Scripture, you're talking about the darkness, the evils of the world, the things like you'd see in a horror movie. I mean, I wouldn't look at a horror. I would say a horror movie. There you go. I mean,
I don't agree. No, I believe that that's definitely a part of it. There are certain things.
Look at the fruit, though. Hear me out. Look at the fruit. What happens? People get. I mean, we see images. One of the reasons, like, say, for pornography or something like that, one of the reasons, like, aside it being immoral and dark, and one of the things is that these images, when seen, stick in the head. It takes a while for these things to go. But it doesn't just work like that with sexual things. It works that way also with, evil, macabre things. It's partly one of the reasons why we have a rating system on movies anyways, because we don't want our children. We know that these things can affect the minds of children and developing minds. I don't think we're as honest with ourselves about how much it affects adults too. Like I said, I'm not joking with you. I had friends in college. Man, I had a friend, no joke, in college who told me, ever since he saw, what was the movie in the 80s where this clown drugged this kid under the bed and was choking him, Poltergeist or something like that? He said, I cannot look at clowns. Maybe it wasn't college. He said, I can't look at them the same. He's like, he went to someone's house that had these dolls, and he had to stay the night in the room where there's this ugly doll looking at him. He cuts off the light, And there's the ugly doll. He said he'd always have to throw his jacket over top of it because it'd freak him out because of what he had seen. A movie for entertainment jarred this guy's soul enough to where he now throws jackets over dolls in rooms he sleeps in because he's freaked out by them. So the reality is we see it actually does affect people for the worse. And then the other way it affects them, as we both agree, is it desensitizes them to us, to where things that should bother us don't bother us anymore. And those who are going for the thrill experience, these guys, it requires each time to get a little deeper, a little darker. That's why they just get, like, some of these things are just beyond creepy now. And actually, I don't know if you've heard of this. Have you heard, like, horror movies aren't quite doing it anymore? Like, have you heard of these haunted house? There's this haunted house. It made national news. There's a 40-page waiver that you have to sign. Have you heard about this? I think it's called, let me see, the McCamey Manor, where in order to experience, because this is what horror people are looking for, that thrill, that scare, that fear. That's the point of haunted houses, is to sit.
I feel like that's going to the. I think that is the extreme, and like I said,
I don't think it's the extreme. I think it's what it's naturally going to take you to, because you're going to it for a feeling, to be terrified and to be grossed out, and
I think some people do, but I don't think everybody does. I didn't. I don't go to those things, and because I pick. Well, usually, I allow myself to go to these, certain things or see certain things, like haunted House on Haunted Hill and The Conjuring, things that are not, first of all, not slasher porn and not horror porn, in the sense that it's not like it's not just it's not about murder as much as it's about the supernatural, and it's a narrative. It's a story. It's storytelling. There is a message. We're not just going to watch it just to be scared, but watching it and being scared is an important part of the message.
I think most people do go for the scare, but it would be incoherent, and I think bothersome to people if there was no story. It would be kind of like, it would be kind of like, I think people, they'd be more aware of the sadisticness of it if there was no story through it. If it was just clip after clip of people dying. There was a movie in the 80s called Faces of Death that had all these pictures or clips of people being attacked by bears and stuff like that. I think some of it was real, some of it was faked. And
dying.
But the whole point was just to watch people die. And I remember as a teenager, a friend of mine, hey, you ever seen Faces of Death? I was like, no, and I saw it, and I saw parts. I didn't even watch the whole thing. It was just macabre. There was a spirit of just watching people die that you normally just kind of feel like, this is just
right.
Gif. So, and I think people would get that feeling themselves if it was just demon guy going and cutting people up. So they got to weave a story that kind of has, okay, we'll throw a little bit of good and evil here and there, but the pull isn't the story of the good and evil. The pull is to watch people die, to watch people encounter the supernatural.
No, I remember hearing about that. A friend of mine wanted me to watch it. I said, no way. I have no desire to watch people die. But I think there's a segment of society that does that. Yes. I'm not, I don't.
Hello?
I don't. Oh. Am I there? I don't have any problem saying, slasher porn, death porn, all these things that people see solely for that, the pleasure of watching something like that. That's totally wrong. Yes.
When you're handling the dark, I mean, we have to be very careful. There were people, this McCamey Manor guy with a 40-page waiver. There are people who agreed to the waiver, didn't make it through. You're supposed to make it like through 24 hours, and if you do, he'll pay you like $10,000 or something like that. Jeez. And long story short, people don't ever make it because it gets so traumatic. There are people who said, I am permanently scarred by what you did, and it's all like, he says, I don't do anything to hurt him. I just play mental games and do all those creepy things, and it jars the soul. Now, Proverbs 4:23, I want to read this to you because I think this explains partly what we're seeing here, okay? It says, watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. And I think you can see that traumatic events tend to be whether they're real life or you're encountering it through a horror story, tend to be things that jar the soul, that jar the heart, and it hurts it. And if it hurts it, it has real life consequences and manifestations. There's a scripture that says, as a man thinks within his heart, so he is. So if this thing gets damaged, scared, terrified, whatever, and you get, whatever, the mind, heart thing, it's going to affect you. It's going to affect how you talk to people, how you see situations, how you sleep in a room with a doll on the chair. You know what I mean? This stuff is
I absolutely don't disagree with you. I just think though that message will either fall on ears that agreeing ears or ears that will just dismiss that. It's to me it's very close to a what is it called? The fundamentalist view of things. It's a very fundamental view, and I guess to me that's what I want to get past. I want to get past the decrying of it, and more. I'm more interested in because you and I are storytellers, and we want to be better storytellers. And so where is the interplay? Just where is the interplay?
I think the interplay here is, it doesn't mean to me, because the point of horror, not even to me, because the point of horror is to shock, jar, and do that, the end result is to scare, terrify. Good, I was terrified, let me go home. I don't think that's good. To me, that's porn. That's fear porn, basically.
So do you feel the same way about...
Hold on. However, if you're getting into movies, if you're showing a real what resonates with audiences is something that does reflect reality, even if it's sci-fi or fantasy, but it still reflects real world themes, situations. That's how people are. That's what would go on if I was in that situation or whatever. Mm-hmm. Reality tends to actually get the person a little more engrossed in the film. But you have to be delicate with it, because we can't show it in as entertainment, not even just entertainment. I wouldn't expose anyone to that if I didn't have to. We have to show it in a muted way. I'm not going to draw a hard, fast line. I know people love these rules, but I think if you think into consideration, if you understand what you're dealing with in the darkness, and you understand it's not an end to itself, but I'll put it in the bigger picture where good overcomes here, or you see how someone endures this. And I think that's when you let that be the motivation, it kind of falls into the place it needs to. You'll start to get a sense of, this is reveling in this darkness here. I don't need to show this guy's head get severed off, fly through, and bounce down a staircase, spraying blood on someone. The horror guy will do that because he wants you to be terrified, to think about what would it be like if someone cut their head off and their blood sprayed all over you, and you just totally didn't see it coming. They want that reaction, but that's not the point of it. And so my take is, you don't show that. Now, do people die? Do people get murdered in ways like that? Yes. But that's where I think things should be muted.
But I want to push us to really, I think what's really interesting to me, at least, and maybe to you, is to really push us and to think right now, to think as, with these verses in our, fresh in our ears.
Well, there's more, that I feel like help build up the picture. So let me give you an example. All right, it says Proverbs 23:26. It says, where is it? Give me your heart, my son, and let your eyes delight in my ways. This is wisdom. It's like this is God. He's talking, give me your heart, my son, let your eyes delight in my ways. And I think when we're looking at the things like horror, you're not seeing the ways of God. Whose ways do you think we're viewing right there? Do you think we're seeing the ways of God or the ways of Satan? And if you're going to handle the ways of Satan in story, the people who go for horror are going typically to see it played out in its ugliness. I feel like they deceive themselves on some level if they're like, no, I'm here to see good win in the end. And some of the most awarded horror films are when evil just wins and everyone dies and it's terrible. Like, oh man, that was so wild and great. It was so visceral, and I'm just like, ugh, you're subjecting people to that, and I don't think we should subject people to that type of stuff. Like in order, how there's like documentaries right now. I'm giving an example. how there's like the new thing, big thing is like documentaries on Rome that are, we're going to show you what Rome was really like. And, they'll have like sex and violence and that. Honestly, that's not even how Rome was like. If you really want to get into it, they're pedophiles. They did all sorts of crazy stuff. Do you want to show that so we can be real and expose people to that? No. It's evil. It's dark. It jars the soul. To even encounter it's this creepy kind of weirdness. So on some level, certain things are muted. Sometimes it's like, guys, there is certain areas that are just like, if you got to go there, you got to handle it delicately because of the darkness you're touching on. And interestingly enough, it's funny for storytellers, right? I mean, I took a class at FTCC to get reacquainted with modern film tech because it's been years since I've messed with it. And we were supposed to shoot a short film. And the guys behind me, no joke, they're like, we want to do a horror film. And I remember I'm sitting there typing away, doing my thing, and I heard them talking, we've heard stories about when we do this horror stuff that sometimes strange and weird things start happening on set. And, they're like, oh, you think that'll happen? Oh, no. They're like, we'll see. They did their horror film. I'm just telling you what they said, and then they showed the class. They were doing this demonic possession film, guy gets possessed, kills everybody, burns the house down kind of thing. No joke. There was some shots where we set up cameras and lights and there's this weird thing going on over here in this corner. And they were all sitting there talking at first. What is that? Who was that? They weren't over there with the light. What is that? And they're all kind of examining and trying to figure that out. And then they kind of showed some of the people. Now, maybe it was an elaborate hoax. I don't know. But I've read things about, people encountering similar things when dealing with similar stories. It's dangerous to kind of delve into the darkness. Actually, Screw Tape Letters, written by C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis said he said it was actually kind of a dark thing to write that book in that way. He said because he had to think like demonic. And he said, and after a while, he said it actually kind of creeped him out. And he said he had to just kind of end the book. So my point is, I'm not saying you can't go to dark things, but remember it's dark. And by going in that, it can affect us in very bad ways. And because horror just takes the glove off and say, we're going there and we're going to go there because the point is to scare you and it's subject to all this and entertain you with this. I'm like, guys, you are totally going in the wrong direction, which is why I'm like, I don't, this is not God honoring. It's the best way I can put it. In fact, I can see how Satan is glorified in it. So, I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I get that.
But let me see here. It tells you that
we're running out of time.
Yeah,
and we've got we've got one person watching, but we don't really have very much engagement as we'd hoped. But
yeah,
I was hoping there'd be more engagement. We could sort of so
bounce some ideas.
Because I mean, for the most part, I agree with you that this is that the light is the lamp of the heart and the soul, and I've always been one that's not. I've never liked horror movies. I just wonder, though, as storytellers, to engage with an audience. My hope isn't to engage with a bunch of fundamentalists. I'll be honest with you. My hope is to engage with those who are hungry and interested in the truth, and that may not know it. And so it is curious to me, and where. How to tell stories, how to have people fall in love with the truth without preaching at them, and with using things that elicit feelings that are typically hard to deal with.
But say you elicit that feeling out of them, then what do you do? I mean, the guy that was watching Saving Private Ryan, they got the feeling out, PTSD, and he's having an episode in the middle of a cinema. What does that do? You've triggered him. It's like, okay. I mean,
yeah.
But I mean, so what's the end? So you get the emotion out there.
Mm-hmm.
where do you go? What's
Well, that's good storytelling would go towards a process and resolution of that in a way that I believe that brings out the truth of the gospel, the
Well, see,
hope.
then where does horror then play into what you just said?
I mean, I see the gospel in the in horror movies that I've seen. Like I saw it in The Conjuring. Probably not as much as in
Well,
uh,
give me like explain. I mean, you said you saw the gospel in The Conjuring. Tell me where, how, explain it.
uh well, I think in the hope, that we have of overcoming evil, and especially in the way that, like I said before, in the courage of being able to step out in faith and confront evil, confront the things that we don't really understand. Um,
But see, the
just
gospel.
having hope that it's already been conquered without that it's outside of us and that we can conquer it. Not us, but something else. That we are part of something bigger.
But see, Islam could work with what you just said. I didn't get any gospel out of what was said there. Buddhism, Hinduism. The gospel is that man's sinful and the wages of sin is death, and we're rebels and desperately wicked, and that God died for us yet when we were sinners because he loved us, and that whoever would turn and believe in him and follow him and love him with all their heart, mind, soul, and strength, love their neighbors themselves,
Mm-hmm.
they'll be saved, and that their sins are paid for by Christ dying on the cross for them. He took the punishment for them. I didn't hear any of that in The Conjuring. I don't see that. Although I could see a lot of just from what you've explained, that just didn't. I don't see anything beyond worldly. I mean,
Well, because it's done by worldly people.
so that's my point. So we can't pick fruit from thorn bushes, and
I think we can. Oh, I think we
no,
can.
scriptures actually say that you'll know them by their fruit. It said, do you pick figs from thorn bushes? No,
But I think
you're
we
getting a
can.
thorn because it's a thorn bush.
But we don't look at art in order to get saved. That's not why we look at art.
But you mentioned the gospel message was in it, and I'm just saying from what you said and from what I read, I was just like, I don't see it.
I'm not saying the overt gospel message. I'm saying that there are ways to engage people with the gospel message. There is a language, that we can overlap with people that appreciate these sort of things. There are places to overlap with people that appreciate these things because it's art. And I believe that I don't believe all art is edifying, but I believe that there is a place where people that aren't saved engage in art, and they're accidentally engaging in truth, and truth is the only way that we get to the gospel.
I agree that there might be some truths in them, but lest we forget, Satan quoted scripture to Christ, and so truth incomplete still doesn't lead you where you need to go.
And that's why I think it's important for us as Christian storytellers to engage with it. Because
Yes,
we're not Satan.
but no, granted. However, if the point is to just jar and scare and terrify, as opposed to point people to God, horror is never going to be your genre, because horror's point. I mean, if the point is to scare, but you want to bring the gospel into it, horror is never going to be your genre, because people aren't going for that. They're going to be scared, terrified, subjected.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, that could be true, but I do think that there is a place as storytellers for us to engage.
No, I agree. I agree with you.
Yeah.
Like, there is a place for dark things in it, but it has to be muted on some levels. I do think you can infer things and show things. I'm not saying it's a sin to be scared or anything like that, but the difference is when you're really still trying to consider the subject matter, you're trying to mute it enough to where you don't jar or psychologically screw someone up, but at the same time elicit the feeling like the audience feels what this character is feeling. There's a way to kind of balance that, and I can't write you a formula for it, other than if you keep that in mind, the knowledge of the bad, muting it because you know how dark it is, but at the same time finding a way to still show in a way where the people get it. And then it doesn't end there, where you just and then they're dead and that's it and life sucks. I mean, unless you're a nihilist, which I hope you're not. You're not. You're a believer. You then show how people overcome, how people get through. You see how God intervenes in all these types of things, which is why I like that movie I was telling you about originally, Beautifully Broken. Yeah. You see how God even worked and operated through all that darkness. And so, I feel like if Hollywood did that movie, they would show the brutality. I mean, I've seen movies like Blood Diamond and some of these other ones, and, they have no problems getting into some of the more graphic stuff to point the picture. But I feel like these filmmakers touched on some hard topics that are dark for sure, but it was an uplifting movie, and the whole movie wasn't just this hard dark thing. It showed it in as much as it interacted with the story, and it let you'd feel the tension, you'd feel the terror, but at the same time it wasn't like the terror you get from a horror movie, which the point is to just jar the soul of man, and it worked. You showed enough to get it, and it worked to then see God's redemption, how God worked through all these people's lives and all that. And I think that's where you can find then its place. Yeah. Lord of the Rings, you got to have an evil. I mean, evil exists. Sauron's kind of like a Satan figure, wraiths, his demons, and all this stuff like that. And, you get to see how you got a story where evil and good interact, and how things get through. How things work out. Some good guys die, some don't, some make it to the end. You get into all those things, and it reflects our world, and it's a good story. They touch on the dark to help bring in the reality and make it just a solid story because it reflects our reality. And you walk away not feeling violated or like gross, like you got to take a shower, or scarred to where now you can't, look at people. Dude, there was a girl in high school. I watched this one horror movie, and I was really interested in her. We were talking. I saw a horror movie where this murderous girl looked just like her. After seeing that, I couldn't look at it the same way. I was just like, not interested in you. I am so scared you're going to murder me. And it was just a dumb movie that I had seen that Sheila was like a clone. I don't know what this. So media can influence, man. It does.
Absolutely. I don't disagree. Well, I think we're going to have to wrap it up there. I think that this was a more productive discussion. I appreciate you bringing in scripture. I think it's a good reminder of.
There's a few others I wanted to get into. Maybe I'll just post them. But I feel like when you take them all collectively, man, it's like, we're called to put aside all filthiness, wickedness, or, there's all these things that we're to do as Christians. We're walking out of the world, and some of the world's going to be clinging to us. So some of us, sometimes you might not think the horror is that bad, but it might be indicative of kind of where we're coming from. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not advocating fundamentalism, which is, I'm just as opposed to fundamentalist approach to things as well. That's just the Pharisee side. And that's not of God either. Mm-hmm. But I feel like when we do have to examine, why do we like these things? What does this invoke? How does this honor God? There's a scripture that I was going to share that says all good things, every perfect and good gift is from above, from God, from the Father of heaven and the lights, where there is no shifting shadow. It's not like, things change depending on your position. It's like, no, if it's good and it's from God, and if it's not from him. So I feel like when we take these collectively, it's like, man, horror as a genre is bang. But anyway.
Yeah, and we may need to look at other genres too.
Agreed. And some people brought that up.
We can't just, apply that to the most obvious of them, right? I feel like horror movies are the most obvious examples of that.
I can't see the sex comedy making the cut either, for the record, So, I'm sure you could, there's others as we think about them that, American Pie, sorry, it didn't make it, but, there's others I'm sure we could examine where the genre as a whole is just not good, Yeah. But there are other genres that are neutral, and they could, depending on how they do it, it's either good or bad, So, I don't know. I just don't think horror is one of them. And horror's not. I don't see it. So anyway.
All right. Well, I think it was a good conversation. I appreciate you bringing that perspective, brother. It's good.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. It's good.
And we got more stuff to talk about next week. We may be getting more into the political side of things. We'll see. But for now, I gotta go. Got Rotor Hackers podcast. If you want to tune in, it's on YouTube. If you're into fantasy football, but it's much different. It's a totally different genre. Not horror though.
Zombie
All right,
football.
brother.
Yeah. All right, man. It's good talking with you. I'll see
Thank you. It's good. I'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye. And to everybody who tuned in, thank you. Talk to you. I wish you had, those of you who tuned in and left a message, but hey, enjoying the conversation. Whatever.
There's always the comment section.
That's right. It'll